And now we got the Succession theme song playing for good reason. In the good words of Jim Ross, business is about to pick up here on the Playmakers. Very excited to have this man on the show. One of the smartest and most eloquent people, in my opinion, in all of sports media. And he lives here in Vegas as well. Andreas Hale, the senior editor of for Combat Sports for Sporting News. He's the co-host of the Corner podcast. He's the host of the Fighting Words podcast. And you can find him on Fight Nation on SiriusXM. And he's the co-creator of Our Heroes Rock. Lindsay, it's a busy man.
Yes.
But all insider calls are powered by BetQL. Bet smarter and beat the books. Download your BetQL app today or visit BetQL.com.
Well, that was a very interesting inflection to end on. But Andreas, thank you so much for joining us today. I know that a lot of people were probably up or had a reason to celebrate because we all work hard, play hard. But who were you rooting for last night between the Warriors and the Celtics? Because until LeBron brings his talents to Dre's Beach Club, we can really be flippant with our fandom.
So I'm big on Steph Curry for the reasons that I believe that the man has been disrespected for a while. As great as he is, it felt like he needed to get an NBA Finals MVP and win a championship. He finally got that with the Finals MVP, and I think we can have a real conversation about where he belongs in the top 15 greatest NBA players of all time. So I was rooting for Steph. I like Steph Curry a lot. I always have. The Celtics will be back. There's no big deal. Tatum, Brown, and the crew, they'll be back.
Yeah, Boston doesn't need any more added confidence to whatever they're working with. I went to college out there, and so it was just very in the face. And I agree with you. Steph Curry has been disrespected, and so has Andrew Wiggins, who I'm a huge fan of. But Adrian mentioned the Succession theme as it's ran out. But earlier you quote tweeted, "This ain't nothing but a new season of Succession," with the news of Stephanie McMahon announcing that she'll be taking over as chairwoman and CEO of WWE. I figure this is a perfect starting point to jump from because there's a lot to take into consideration in this timeline of events. Because didn't she leave the company a few weeks ago?
She took a leave of absence, which the timing's very peculiar. A couple of weeks ago, she took a leave of absence to spend time with her family. Then 2 weeks later, all this news surfaces about the internal investigation over hush money. Vince McMahon steps down as CEO, but he's still in charge of creative at WWE. And voila, Stephanie McMahon is in as acting CEO. Is this by accident? Absolutely not. And that's why it's Succession. And if anybody watches Succession, this is Shiv's play to take over the Roy family business. This is Shiv's play.
And kind of like in Succession, Andreas, I want to ask you, and you actually retweeted it as well, kind of, someone took the time out just to point out a few incidents that start from the 80s and probably before then. But what does it say about, whether you're an AEW fan, whether you're a WWE fan, or just wrestling in general, that on Twitter for once there was an actual consensus of everyone going, oh yeah, we're not surprised that any of this actually happened?
You know what, man? It's the worst kept secret in pro wrestling. I mean, Vince has been at the center of a lot of controversies over the past 40 years since he's been taken over as WWE with Titan Towers being created and so on and so forth. But these rumors have gone on for a long time between, allegations, steroid trial. But what it tells us more than anything else, and I think a lot of people will agree with this, there is a kinship with Donald Trump where I think the man is bulletproof, where he can do so many things wrong, but he's almost too big to fail. And I think this might be another instance where Vince McMahon gets away with it. Donald Trump became president. Despite all the things that happened, all the controversies, even while he was in office, the man remained president. He didn't get impeached. Vince McMahon is in that same boat. When you're a certain level of elite, it's hard to defeat that main boss. It's almost impossible. But we all know it. Everybody knows it. I don't think anything necessarily will change. There's a lot of controversy. We'll see what happens when Nick Khan, the company, does. He's got shareholders to answer to. But aside from that, I don't think this is going to be something that's going to have long-term effects. I think eventually Vince will be back installed into power. I think there'll be a fall guy, John Laurinaitis, who is head of talent relations. I think he'll be the fall guy here, and it'll be business as usual.
It's hard to disagree with your take, Andreas, and it's honestly really disheartening because I completely agree with you. We throw the word accountability around a lot, but that's more of a talk the talk and not walk the walk in terms of our country's history. But ironically, we're hours away from WWE SmackDown Live from my hometown in Minneapolis, and Vince is supposed to be making an appearance or a statement. I can't imagine we're in a scenario where this goes well, but it's almost a catch-22 if you ask me.
I think when you believe you're bulletproof and you probably don't know how much a gallon of milk costs, you kind of do things that people wouldn't advise you to do. And Vince McMahon's life is pro wrestling. And he's going to treat this as a storyline. And the word is he's going to appear in character on SmackDown to address the situation. Yeah, you're right. Nothing good can come out of it. But again, it's Vince McMahon. I'm more interested to see how many people cheer for this man when he comes out. It tells us a lot about the state of affairs when somebody's been accused of these things and you have $3 million in hush money, all this controversy. The man is bold enough to step out. Come on. This is Donald Trump all over again. And we're going to see how many people root for Vince McMahon to win. No matter how heinous the allegation, it doesn't matter. People are going to cheer for that man to win.
And Andreas, Lindsay just said earlier, the key word to me is accountability. And the most fascinating part of this, like, for instance, John Laurinaitis, who's also, accused and is a part of this investigation, he was known to be a creep. WWE brought him back. He was head of talent relations. Female staff voiced concern. They were anonymous, and they said, we don't want this guy. Mickie James gets fired and says, they sent my stuff home in a trash bag after all these years and everything I gave to this company. But I would rather get that sent home to me than have any interaction with John Laurinaitis. And to me, you're one of these people that covers wrestling and talks about it, that tries to hold things to be accountable. But I feel like from a general sense, because it's professional wrestling and everything's a storyline, even people questioning what's going on here, that is very real for this publicly traded company, how important it is for the media to take this and be accountable and hold WWE accountable. Because to me, if this happened in any other pro sport, this would be a bigger story.
Absolutely. The WWE and pro wrestling in general is probably the last of the protected media outlets, the media companies. And what I mean by that is, it's very hard to see what's going on behind the curtain. I think in every other sport, we have press conferences. There's a lot of transparency. In WWE, there's not. The line between reality and fantasy is blurred early and often, to the point where it's very difficult, even as a journalist, to try to figure out what's really going on. Guys, once upon a time, Vince McMahon blew himself up with a limo, and Donald Trump called to make sure he was okay. People don't know what's going on here, and this bleeds into this particular instance. Because, yes, the word is that John Laurinaitis is a creep. And that's been something that's been going on for a long time. But the same has been going on about Vince McMahon. And it played into a storyline where he was cheating on Linda McMahon with Trish Stratus. That was over 20 years ago. But it's hard for the members of the media to really try to boil this down to the nitty-gritty and to truly hold them accountable, because there is still a curtain there. There's still a wall that has not truly been broken down to give people some insight on the behind the scenes of Vince McMahon's empire. And because of that, it makes it difficult for anybody to get a real read on it. And hopefully, as time progresses, and to be honest, sad to say, I don't think things are going to change, and not until Vince is out of power, until Vince is gone. And what I mean by gone is gone from this earth. I don't think things are going to change. It's going to be very difficult to understand what goes on in the business.
Yeah, pro wrestling is just such a unique environment. And that for specifically female talent over other sports and entertainment entities. But that doesn't mean that they're treated equally. And like you said, that without transparency, we can't really tell, and nobody can be held accountable. I'm sure the people even within the company themselves have trouble figuring out what's going on. And that's just indicative of a toxic environment. So I just find it so fascinating to see that Stephanie McMahon stepping away. And then we have like the Sasha Banks storyline, or not really storyline, her taking her power back, saying, I don't want to work here anymore. I want my release. What do you think she's thinking about right now?
The word is that she has been released. That's the report that we've seen going on, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. Nobody knows. Nobody knows exactly what's going on. People thought it was a storyline with Sasha and Naomi left television over creative. They didn't agree with the creative. Sasha essentially took her ball and went home and left television. But then they started taking down the merchandise, and they were on TV. It was the first time it had ever been addressed that when she went home, they called her unprofessional. That's never happened in pro wrestling. So she's sitting at home right now, and if she has been released or is considering it or whatever is going on, she's got to kind of be smiling because, the one thing that she has that a lot of other talent doesn't, she has Mandalorian money right now. She was just in Star Wars. So she doesn't have to necessarily be concerned about coming back to the WWE, or she doesn't need it anymore. She's starting to create a life outside of pro wrestling. And that's the one thing that WWE often doesn't want to see happen. They don't want to see talent move up from under their thumb and create a life on their own. So I'm not saying she's pleased, but I'm sure there's a sly little grin right now looking at what's going on.
And Andreas, you talk about Sasha and, her getting Disney checks and being a part of Hollywood now and the Star Wars franchise. This is a little bit of Succession. It's a little bit of Game of Thrones. And if it is Game of Thrones, then Littlefinger is Nick Khan, who's actually, he's been on this show and Lindsay's talked to him. And I don't think it could be overstated how big of a story this is, not only for wrestling, but also WWE. It might be the biggest story. And with Nick Khan, immediately you could tie all the changes, whether it's NXT, how the product is presented, and, just how we're viewing talent and what we want to show audiences with Nick Khan. And we've seen the memes and the rumors. Where do you think he plays into this?
I've seen a lot of things talking about Nick Khan's going to take over the company, but Nick Khan, from all that I know, doesn't know much about pro wrestling. What he does know is how to run a business. And I believe he was brought in to clean up those books because they were overpaying a lot of talent that weren't being used on TV at all. So I believe that Khan's role is to clean up the books, make sure this company is profitable. Some people would say it's to sell. I think it's just to make Vince McMahon happy. Vince McMahon is 74 years old?
76.
He can't handle all the things that he used to do. And you bring in somebody like Nick Khan who's experienced, who doesn't touch creative. I don't think he cares about creative, but he cares about making sure the bottom line is what keeps Vince McMahon, the shareholders, happy. So I think that's his role. I think people get a little confused. They think Nick Khan's coming in to change the look of professional wrestling or sports entertainment, and he's bringing in his guy. No, Nick doesn't care. I think he's handling that bottom line, and as long as Vince and the shareholders are happy, I think Nick's happy. And if it ever comes to a point where they want to sell, those books will be cleaned up to the point where they maximize their profit. And I think that's it.
Sounds like Khan's more of a mercenary guy, but not a general, at least not a mind for a general.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to pro wrestling or most businesses, you have your creative side, you have your business side. I think Nick is being brought in on the business because, again, this is a publicly traded company that reaches far beyond just what's going on in the pro wrestling ring. They do charity events, they have a film division. There's all kinds of things that they do, and I think Nick is there to make sure that all that stuff is operating properly and they're not in the red. And as we've seen over the past year, they're recording record profits. Even if people don't agree with the product they see on TV, which is pretty bad, it doesn't matter because it's an institution now, and people watch it out of habit. So he's just there to make sure that everything's good and the wheels are still turning. But obviously, this situation throws a monkey wrench into everything.
Andreas Hale joining us from Sporting News, SiriusXM's Fight Nation. And just a couple more questions before we get you out of here. And you talk about how bad the product's been in some people's eyes. It should be most people's eyes when it comes to WWE. I just want to get your perspective of how bad of a look is it for WWE to move this Money in the Bank that, 2 weeks away from now, from Allegiant Stadium to MGM Grand Garden Arena, to not have Roman Reigns your champion for a third straight month not being able to compete or won't compete. Randy Orton, we just found out, it's going to be out for a year. And then on the flip side, too, because we had Britt Baker on the show, AEW was here for Double or Nothing. That's their biggest show of the year. Kind of get your perspective and some of your thoughts, because I know you had Tony Khan on your Corner podcast. So if you could talk about those things for me.
Sure. I mean, look, the WWE coming to Las Vegas, which is the home of the UFC, to run an event opposite of International Fight Week, which is the UFC's biggest weekend of the year, in their backyard, was a ballsy move. And they came up short. I wouldn't have done it. WWE usually runs their big shows on Sunday, but they wanted to go head-to-head with the UFC for reasons that I'll never understand. And because of that, they couldn't sell enough tickets at Allegiant Stadium. They moved it to the MGM, which I still think the show will fare well because people can still bring their kids to watch pro wrestling. But the fact of the matter is, Paris is burning. You have so many injuries. Your champion hasn't been on TV for weeks. He hasn't defended the title since he won it at WrestleMania, and he's supposed to be defending it tonight on SmackDown. We'll see how that plays out. You have so many injuries. You've thinned out your roster. You have NXT, which is one time was one of the hottest super indie shows in the country. You stripped it down to bring in just athletes and try to teach them how to pro wrestle, which is a difficult thing. But when all these things aren't working cohesively, Paris is burning. Now, it doesn't mean that the WWE is going to fail next year or next week or even in the next 5 years. But trouble is brewing, and it leaves the door wide open for somebody like Tony Khan and his all-elite wrestling to kind of fill that void where lapsed pro wrestling fans can come back to what they love, where it can get a foothold in this industry. Vince has had a stranglehold on it since he bought WCW, 22 years ago. So since now we have legit competition, we have a product that pro wrestling fans do not necessarily care for. Ratings aren't too great, but they're still making money, so nothing necessarily has to change. Look, I don't like Money in the Bank being at Allegiant, going head-to-head with UFC not moving to MGM. But is it going to kill their bottom line? Probably not. But the issue is it's a sign of things to come. And with this Vince McMahon news coming, it just makes matters even more complicated. But if you're Tony Khan, you got to be sitting pretty in the catbird seat, looking down and saying, as long as we keep running our business as is, we can slowly creep up on WWE. But WWE is in trouble. Not a lot of trouble, but the city's starting to burn.
And Andreas, before we get you out of here, two quick ones. Number one, is Jeff Hardy going to wrestle again in AEW or WWE? And number two, if someone has to take over, Stephanie McMahon was the same one to take over that CEO role, correct?
I'll answer your second question first. Yes. Stephanie McMahon, the boss's daughter, has always been in the position, just like Succession with Shiv, always been in that position to take over the company. She's the only person that can do it. She may not have the work ethic as Vince McMahon, because Vince McMahon, as everybody knows, is a maniac. The man doesn't sleep. He has his hands on everything. But when it comes to the business, when it comes to having a woman as the figurehead of that company, she's perfect. A lot of people say Triple H, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Paul Levesque will be the man, but it seems like him and Vince McMahon had bumped heads. There were some health issues there. Shane McMahon, obviously, he's been in and out of the business, but Stephanie is perfect for that role. So if it does come up where that temporary position becomes permanent, it would be Stephanie. To your point about Jeff Hardy, listen, I've been a fan of Jeff Hardy for years, but these alcohol issues have followed him for the better half of the past decade, no, almost 20 years. And with this latest arrest, AEW is going to have to do the right thing and say, you have to go to rehab and prove yourself completely sober. You can't wrestle while in rehab. It's got to be a huge process. I'm not sure if we see Jeff Hardy in the pro wrestling ring again. He's too much of a danger. At a certain point, you got to save wrestlers for themselves. And if anybody's seen Dark Side of the Ring, a lot of these stories don't end well. And for somebody like Jeff Hardy, if AEW or any of his friends care, they can't let him wrestle again, because it seems like that is his distraction from his real-life demons. He's got to take care of those demons, and I hope he does so. Then maybe we can see him in the wrestling ring, but in the near future, I want him to get all the help that he needs.
Absolutely. People first, athletes and entertainers second, but for some reason the world doesn't tell us that. Thank you so much for joining us, Andreas, especially at this very contentious time in professional wrestling world. We truly appreciate you and your insight.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely. That was Andreas Hale, senior editor of Combat Sports at the Sporting News, co-host of the Corner Podcast. He has a host of the Fighting Words. He's on SiriusXM. He's got tons of bobbers in the water right here in Las Vegas. All guests are brought to us by BetQL. Smarter bets start with BetQL. Download the BetQL app or visit BetQL.com today. And on the other side of the break, fancy pantsy.